Hello there, welcome to another episode of World of Tanks with Ngani Titan. This episode of the Tank Talks, I'm going to discuss the roles of tanks as assigned by Wargaming and how those roles play out in the game. So the first role that I'm going to look at are self-propelled guns or artillery. Artillery is very controversial in the game. There are a lot of people who believe that artillery shouldn't be in the game. And there have been very strong and very vocal opposition to the existence of artillery from the beginning of the game in the console and on the PC, to the best of my knowledge. However, Wargaming have not removed the game, artillery from the game, and I don't believe at this point that they're going to, that it's a feature of the game and it's going to remain a feature of the game. They may change the nature of which artillery works. They've made considerable changes to artillery on the PC version of the game. And personally, I believe that these changes would be quite useful if applied to the console. That said, the critics of artillery do have a point. The way artillery is implemented in the game is problematic in my opinion. First of all, artillery, as far as I know in real world use, except on certain occasions, usually against fixed targets or something like that, where one gun might be deployed, was usually deployed en masse. Multiple batteries on a particular area, and it was usually either a suppression or an area denial weapon. It was either to block a choke point or to suppress a strong point while the enemy advanced around that strong point, or while the Allies advanced around that strong point. And in the game, artillery's been used at ranges where historically they were actually more likely, if they found themselves in that situation, they were going to be operating in direct fire mode. However, in the game they actually operate in indirect fire mode. So this is what happens when you play artillery. You see the game from a top-down position once you zoom in. Use the zoom controls like normal. You get this top-down view, and the only time you can fire in direct mode is basically in the isometric third-person view, where you just shoot across the open sights, so to speak. When you're in the top-down view, the point of that into that green line, or the line that turns red, is the aiming point for the normal ballistic arc of the artillery. And if it's green, it means there's no obstructions. The dotted line that you see expanding in and out is the deviation probability. It can be a circle or an ellipse depending on the terrain and the direction of the gun and the gun you're firing. So artillery is characterized by relatively slow reloads and high alpha. The higher the alpha, the slower the reload. There are variations by nations and within guns. The British tend to have low alpha rapid firing artillery. French, something similar. Germans, Americans and Russians tend to have high alpha and low rates of fire, and varying degrees of inaccuracy as well. Players that don't like artillery tend to don't like it because of its semi-random nature. Often the first thing you know about artillery is when a shell drops in the sky and wipes you out. And that really annoys people because there is no warning, no indication and no defense. Which is why it can be very annoying. It's a bit like an act of God. And also, a lot of people then, particularly ones that don't play artillery, regard it as completely without any skill. Now, I don't agree with them. It doesn't require, I think, as much skill as playing a regular tank. But it's not without skills. But it is really a different game mode. You're not playing the same game as everybody else. The skills you need for artillery really are map reading and situational awareness to play it really well, or to actually influence a game. You can do well statistically in terms of damage delivered and kills without those skills, but to actually influence a game, to cause wins, I think you actually need to pay attention to the map and the situation. Also, the kind of skills you learn, other than the knowledge of the maps and what players do on particular maps, which are very useful skills, pretty much nothing else you do in artillery is transferable to other tanks. If you are playing artillery, what skills should you put on your crews? Well, Sixth Sense and Brothers in Arms are good skills in every tank. I would personally then go with something that improves the gun performance, something that reduces the bloom, so like Smooth Ride, Snapshot. After that, really, with anything, it doesn't really matter. I don't actually have that much skills on artillery. Generally, with shells, I would go with high explosives. I don't see the point in loading anything else. They're pretty effective. You get specialized rounds in some of them. And some high-tier American artilleries have, and some maybe others have premium shells with enhanced splash radius, which could be worth it. Equipment, I would go with rammer, gun lane drive, and camouflage netting. Consumables doesn't really matter. If you're spotted and you're shot at, repair kits are probably worth it. I generally have gone with standard loadouts because at the time you weren't allowed to use multiple repair kits, but nowadays I might actually use just 2 small repair kits. But stuff like health packs, fire extinguishers, probably not worth it because you'll use it and then die because you're not going to survive a second shot and you're really not going to be able to shoot back very effectively. You generally get one chance of shooting back, and that's it. If you don't hit with that shot, you rarely get a chance of a second one. Simply because the hit points on the armor on tanks on artillery is so low that once the enemy gets the chance of firing multiple shots at you, you are not going to survive. At least not on your own. You're relying on your teammates to rescue you, or really on your own map awareness to avoid being caught by enemy tanks in the first place. So if you're on the receiving end of artillery, what do? Well, really the only effective thing to do with artillery is go somewhere else and try not to be spotted. At the early game, artillery will tend to shoot whoever's spotted early, so being aggressive and being completely on your own is inviting artillery to target you because it's got nothing else to be doing. If you're on your own and you're being targeted by artillery, you really need to lose the spot and then relocate out of that area, the map square that you're in at least, because artillery, if it retasks to move to another area, will have a long target acquisition and aim time issue again. The other alternative is you can drive in under tall objects between you and the enemy artillery if you know the direction the guns are coming at you from. But that's only a temporary solution in the sense if the artillery decides to move, to relocate, to shoot at you, it will find a location that you can be got at. So effectively leaving the area, moving to somewhere else and let the artillery target other people in that area is the most effective way to avoid artillery. If you have a fairly maneuverable tank, you might just let him shoot at you and hope for the best. Tank destroyers are another category of vehicle in Wargaming's organisational chart on the tech tree. However, it includes a lot of vehicles that were actually initially designed as assault guns, so including that Su-152 there you saw at the beginning. Others are dedicated anti-tank guns, like the Marder 38T you're looking at there. Some of the British AT series were actually designed as assault tanks as well, even though they're armoured. They're armed with very effective anti-tank guns, and guns that were better at anti-tank role than they were in high explosives for attacking and demolishing fortifications. Some of the more heavily armoured tank destroyers can, under certain circumstances, double up as effective heavy tanks, and can be played in that role by sufficiently skilled players. It's not something I'd recommend that you do unless you're sure you're able to do it, so to speak, because they have weaknesses, including very vulnerable flanks, slow turning arcs, and stuff like that mitigates against their role as heavy tanks. But they can be used, and I've seen people use it very effectively. It's not something I would necessarily be good at in using tank destroyers in that kind of a role. However, the bulk tank destroyers tend to be lightly armoured, good at stealth, and with accurate long-range guns. So the playstyle depends really on the tank destroyer. Varies by tank destroyer, varies by vehicle type, varies by nation, and even within nations it can vary from tier to tier, depending on what the original design philosophy behind the tank destroyers was. Quite a lot of tank destroyers, particularly the German ones, I think were kind of pressed into service ad hoc for the need to have gun platforms, and the fact that their manufacturing capacity couldn't keep up with the demand for regular battle tanks. So there weren't built from scratch dedicated systems. There were stuff that was developed on the fly in order to fill a need that was quite pressing. And they happened to have a lot of obsolete tank chassis lying around that they could use for tank destroyers. So that's how the Hetzer and the Marder 38T came into existence. They're essentially using the Panzer 38 chassis that the Germans had in large abundance and pressing them into another role. So, if you were playing tank destroyers, the majority of them, in my opinion, have the stealth, stand off at a distance and shoot stuff style, and they work very well in that way. That's the way I prefer to play them. They have accurate long-range guns, and they are quite stealthy, and you can just sit back, let other people do the spotting, and you just rack up the damage with rapid-firing, accurate guns. Ones that aren't that style that need to be at closer ranges, then you need to figure out how to use the map and or crew skills to make up for the deficiencies in the tank's overall design. And some tanks, like some of the later British AT series, you abandon stealth altogether. They're really heavy assault tanks, and they're not stealthy in any fashion, although they can be used in long or medium range fire support because the guns are still quite good. So by default, if I knew nothing about a tank destroyer, I would tend to go with rammer, binoculars and camouflage netting. Except in cases where it's obviously a waste. I wouldn't put camouflage netting on an AT-15 or a Tortoise, and I probably wouldn't put it on a Ferdinand or a Jagdpanzer E100. Because they're just big and they're going to be spotted anyway, and there's no point in trying to camouflage them. However, a lot of the others will benefit from being hidden and not being seen. Put the rammer on because increasing the rate of fire of every tank is always good, and the only time I wouldn't put a rammer on the tank really is if the aim time of the tank was longer than the reload with the rammer. Because then the temptation, in my case at any rate, to pull the trigger as soon as it's loaded would be too high, and I would then be missing with more shots than I would be if I just waited for the reticle to settle and the tank to be fully aimed. Skills, Sixth Sense would be a first for any tank destroyer. Brothers in Arms, of course, fairly early on. The other skills I would go for normally would be, I would go gun handling and or stealth skills initially, depending on the tank and on the gun handling of the tank already. If it had long aim times, for instance, I would be inclined to go with snapshot. If I had to move the hull a lot, smooth ride. And also I would be inclined to go for stealth skills next, and everything that improves the stealth of the tank. Finally, then I would go for view range extension. I would be inclined to use tank destroyers mostly as a supporting tank role. So now some of them benefit massively from view range extension. The Hellcat has a really good view range, for instance, and can support itself. Heavy tanks are primarily breakthrough tanks. They're to push against strong defences. They're versatile enough to be sometimes to be used in other areas. Some of them have good mobility, some of them are slow. and some of them aren't really heavy tanks in the sense that in the latter period you evolution into the main battle tank philosophy, which was a hybrid between a medium and a heavy tank, not quite as heavy as a heavy tank, but more and not quite as mobile probably as medium, although some of them were, because engine technology had improved quite a lot. So at the very high tiers you get some of those like the Chieftain, which are really main battle tanks. The other thing that you find is that some of the British heavy tanks, for instance, are infantry support tanks, which is a different philosophy, a completely different philosophy of armoured warfare, and they're actually extremely slow because they were designed just to move at the infantry rate and move with infantry speed. But essentially, like the British heavy tanks, the Churchills, are infantry support tanks and or infantry tanks as they were designated in the British system. But so are the Matildas, which are also designated as medium tanks in Wargaming's classifications. On the Wargaming battlefield and random battles, the heavy tank, you tend to use it to push through choke points, to push through build-up areas. These are the tanks that you hear most people using when they're attempting to use stuff like side scraping, where they're using an obstacle to cover the weak spots in the front of the tank and then just reveal enough of the side armour at an angle to bounce as many shots as possible and just pull back enough to expose weak spots only as long as they need for the gun to fire, and then pull back into cover again. You'll also find techniques like angling the armour, where again they're trying to present the armour at angles to maximise the thickness of armour and to maximise the chances of shots bouncing off of the armour. Again, these aren't panaceas. They're not going to guarantee you success or anything like that, but they are useful techniques, and they're the kind of stuff that you can do in heavy tanks. You have the hit points. You generally have the armour to bounce a lot of shots, and you're the one that should be taking fire, so to speak. Generally they're characterised with high alpha guns. So you're using them to kind of push choke points or block choke points, depending on whether you're attacking or defending, and attract a lot of the enemy attention so that the medium tanks and the tank destroyers can take out enemy tanks, and they aren't the ones receiving the fire because they're less able to do it. You're spending part of your hit point pool to keep your teammates in play. The styles of heavy tanks really varies quite a bit from nation to nation. American heavies, for instance, tend to have very strong turrets, good upper glacis, but very low, weak side armour and weak lower front plates. The Russian heavies tend to have either very heavy flat armour in the KV series, or not so thick armour but very well sloped armour like in the Josef Stalin series, but very high alpha guns with rather poor accuracy. British heavy tanks tend to have rapid firing guns, heavy armour but very much on the slow side. Germans tend to be reasonably well armoured, fairly mobile, with rapid firing low alpha guns. So it varies from nation to nation, and can vary quite a bit sometimes within the tech trees of nations, because the tank philosophy evolved in various powers over the war. Skills to put on heavy tanks, it depends really on the heavy tanks you're dealing with. Russian heavy tanks, I would go with repair. Sixth Sense I don't think is necessary. Some people consider it essential on every tank, but I think if you're doing the heavy tanks role, and the heavy tank is, not all heavy tanks are capable of that role. You get some of them that are quite weak and need to be used more judiciously. But if the heavy tank is capable of doing the heavy tank role, then in my opinion you don't need Sixth Sense, and I would prioritise repair, gun handling depending if it needed it or not, depending on the accuracy of the guns. The other thing that I would be looking at would be, particularly in the Russian tanks, firefighting or preventative maintenance. because they tend to catch fire quite a lot. Equipment wise, again, rammers, possibly good lane drives, vents if you've got a lot of skills in the cruise. Again, it's pretty much, you have to be a bit careful about it really, because it varies from tank to tank and nation to nation as to what's most effective and what you need. So that's it really. I don't think I have much more to say about heavy tanks. Since this video is heading into the kind of length that would take me more than a day to get it uploaded with my internet, I'm going to cut it short here, and we will look at medium tanks and light tanks in another episode. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you again soon.